Duke slipped back in Forbes college rankings this week. What did the rankings measure, and what does that drop mean for Duke? I'm Jake Sheridan, and you're listening to DukeWeek, the Chronicle's weekly news podcast. Today, we're going to hear from Durham Mayor Steve Schewel. He'll be leaving office after Durham's November election, and he'll share with us what he's most proud of, as well as what he thinks are the biggest challenges that Durham faces. Then, Chronicle reporter Alison Korn will tell us about a student effort to create an ethnic studies department and increase representation for Native American, Latino and Asian American folks in courses and faculty. But first, news editor Anna Zolotor is going to break down Duke's slide on the Forbes list. Hi, Anna.
Hi.
So, Duke fell back 3 places in Forbes 2021 college rankings. Do we just close the school now, or what?
Yeah, I think that it's pretty much time for us all to drop out. There's no point in being here anymore.
So tell me about these rankings. What do they measure and why are they a big deal?
Yeah, so these rankings it's kind of vague what they actually measure, but they put schools through this algorithm and they use a bunch of different factors to kind of determine the quality of schools. And in the past, it's kind of been used as a measure of prestige, but this year, Forbes actually re-evaluated their ranking methodology. So things are a little bit different, and they now factor in, quote unquote, what kind of students universities educate and whether they make themselves accessible to those who can't afford high sticker prices. So sort of a different thing that they're evaluating this year than in the past.
Why did they reevaluate everything?
You know, I think that it's probably been a long time coming. I think that there's some criticism of using these rankings to evaluate the prestige. The things that go into this algorithm are a little bit controversial in some ways, but I think they said they took the pandemic as kind of a time to really rework those algorithms.
You wrote that Duke is number 1 in our hearts. What number are they for Forbes now?
They are currently 12th for Forbes, which is the same as their ranking for the 2021 edition of US News.
So we dropped 3 places to number 12. What does a drop in the rankings signify here?
Yeah, so in this case, we don't know kind of what numbers went in for every school into their algorithm. So it could mean a number of things. It could be that the new methodology was the reason for Duke's drop in the rankings. So it could be that Duke was evaluated as not making themselves as accessible for students who couldn't afford the high cost, and that could be the reason. The highest weighted statistic is actually alumni salary a number of years after graduation, which is sort of an interesting way of evaluating both how effective a school's teaching and educational resources are, but it also is a way of looking at prestige and how much a school name matters on a student's resume. So that's the highest weighted statistic. That's 20% of the algorithm, which is huge. But then it also includes a bunch of different factors like student debt, student return on investment, student retention rate, so how many people are dropping out versus remaining for all 4 years, graduation rate. And then also, interestingly, the number of students who make the Forbes American Leaders list, and also the number of students who earn certain degrees. So they put in how many students earn PhDs, and then also the number of students who earn certain fellowships and scholarships like the Fulbright. The big interesting thing about this year is that UC Berkeley was number 1 in the rankings, and that's the first time ever that a public school topped the list, which is pretty crazy, and I think speaks to the strength of the changes in their methodology.
The U.S. News and World Report Best National Universities rankings came out on Monday after I spoke with Anna, and Duke moved up. The university ranked 9th there. It was 12th last year. All right, next we have Durham Mayor Steve Schewel, and he's going to reflect on his time in office and the challenges facing Durham ahead. Mayor Schewel, thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here. Thank you a lot for having me, Jake.
You're stepping down after 4 years in office. Why did you decide to not run again?
Well, I've been in office either as a school board member, a city council member, or mayor for 14 of the last 17 years. So I've been in office for a really long time, and I've enjoyed it a lot. It's been great. I feel like I've been able to make a good contribution, but I'm ready. I'm only 70 years old. I've got a lot of life ahead of me, so I'm looking forward to some new things.
Do you know what might come next?
Well, I have a grandbaby she lives 5 minutes from me. That'll be part of what's next. But in terms of work, I really don't. I'm going to take some time and figure it out.
Reflecting on your time in office and your time serving the city in your other roles, what are you most proud of?
Well, I'm proud of a couple different things. I'm really proud of the way our community has risen to the occasion during the COVID pandemic. Durham has done very well. And one of the things I'll say for sure is that Duke has been a big part of that. And Durham folks have done the things that are necessary to keep them safe. And I'm really proud of our affordable housing work. We passed the largest affordable housing bond in the state, a $95 million affordable housing bond, probably by a factor of 2 larger than any other housing bond in the history of our state. And it's going to house eventually in the next few years about 15,000 Durham residents in permanently affordable housing. And I'm really proud of that. And it got 76% of the Durham voters approved it. So those are a couple of things I'm very proud of it over the last few years.
How do you think Durham's changed in the last 4 years?
The pandemic has really colored that incredibly in terms of the economic dislocation. You have one group of people that's prospering enormously, even during the pandemic, and another group that's really still suffering. We have a lot of gun violence. We've had more gun violence than we've had in a long time because people are out of work. Kids are out of school, have been out of school previously, and on the streets and under the influence of the streets, more mental health problems. All those things have been very difficult, but the city has shown its resilience. And again, I'm really proud of that. There are so many creative ideas of ways to keep people safe. The other thing, of course, that's happening, regardless of the pandemic, is gentrification. Gentrification is a real and powerful force. The average person that moves to Durham has an income that's $10,000 more than the average person that lives here now. They're competing for housing. They're driving people, mainly people of color, out of the long-term, out of neighborhoods they've lived in for a long period of time. And this is a really difficult problem. Our affordable housing work will help mitigate that, and it's really important to help mitigate that. But it's really hard to stop those forces. We're in a big global economy, and you can't really stop them. But we can make a dent, and more than a dent, with our affordable housing work. So,
someone's going to be replacing you in a couple months. What do you think the biggest challenges for them will be?
Well, there's still going to be a pandemic to get through. And then there are the challenges that we all know, how to continue the affordable housing work, although that's ongoing, is going to happen. How to help us build a really good transit system. We just made our buses fare free for everyone, but how to build that system out and how to get good regional transportation, the commuter rail and other good regional transportation. We need good regional transportation. And then the issue of gun violence continues to plague us, and all the work that the city can do on climate change. There's a lot that we can do. We do a lot now, but that needs to continue. Here's the thing I think that's really important. In the next 20 years, for a person your age who lives here in the next 20 years, Durham is now and will be the best place to live in America. We're an affordable place to start a business. We have an incredible entrepreneurial culture. We have a diversity that's unrivaled by any city. We do not have a racial or ethnic majority, and we embrace and welcome everyone. There are no barriers in Durham. We have a robust democracy here and a very robust political culture. We have grassroots democracy that is alive and well, and our cultural life is amazing. And then can I add, we're 3 hours from the beach and 3 hours from the mountains if you happen to like those things. So yeah, that's what I would say. Question for Durham is to solve this gentrification challenge in the long run. But this is going to be the best place to live in America, and we need to make the city we love a city for all.
Thanks for talking with us, Mayor Schewel.
Really good to see you, Jake. Thanks for having me.
By the way, check out the Chronicle's coverage of the Durham 2021 elections. There's a primary on October 5th, and the general election is on November 2nd. We're electing 3 city council members and, of course, a new mayor. In March 2021, a group of students petitioned Duke to create an ethnic studies department and increase representation in courses and faculty. Features Managing Editor Alison Korn is here to talk about the petition and what's happened since it was first shared. Hey, Alison.
Hi.
So, calls for an ethnic studies department picked up in a petition last March. Who shared that petition and what did it say?
Yeah, so a bunch of student groups got together and wrote this petition, including the Asian American Alliance, the Asian American Studies Working Group, the Asian Students Association, and some others. And they all got together and wrote up a list of demands that they've had based on things that happened in the past in regards to ethnic studies and hate and bias, and just some issues that they identified at Duke that they wanted to share with the community and raise awareness to. And so they shared this petition with the student body. and it ended up getting thousands of signatures. And so it really blew up in a short amount of time.
So this wasn't the first time that students demanded an ethnic studies department at Duke, right?
It was not. When I talked to one of the members of the Asian American Studies working group, she was telling me that they'd actually called for an ethnic studies department since 2003. And they repeated these demands multiple years in 2013, 2015, 2016, with multiple letters alongside other student groups on campus, including the Black Coalition Against Policing and the Gente. But every time they wrote up these demands and wrote about ethnic studies, they felt like they were not met by Duke. And so this is the latest installation in a series of calls for ethnic studies.
That's really interesting. So the calls for an ethnic studies department at Duke are just about as old as me.
Yes.
So why do students think this matters?
Well, obviously, representation is very important in any situation. And so a lot of students feel like at Duke, they are not represented in terms of faculty and just departments and courses. When talking to these students, I learned that a lot of times they feel very isolated when they don't have faculty that can represent them and support them, including the Native American students, and how there were barely any. Now there's a couple, but before there were barely any Native American professors at all. And so they had to look for other outlets to find support instead of faculty. And so it's very important to bring in ethnic studies, increase the amount of available courses for these students so that they are able to learn about their culture and able to experience support and see themselves in the professional academic world. I just really feel like they're being taught authentically and not by someone who doesn't understand their perspective.
Mm-hmm. What else does this petition call for?
Yeah, so this petition calls for 4 things. It calls for ethnic studies. It calls for the addition of more cultural centers and more spaces for these groups to meet and feel welcome and feel a sense of community. It calls for data disaggregation. And it also calls for better hate and bias policies because in the past, as they've mentioned in the petition, Duke has mentioned hate and bias and like trying to reduce it, but they don't feel like anything's actually been done concretely to reduce it.
How has Duke administration reacted to the petition?
Yeah, so kind of like all petitions, I feel like sometimes administration has a pretty slow response, especially student petitions, but I feel like this one got so many signatures and became so big that they kind of couldn't ignore it. And so when I was talking to one of the students, she was telling me about how all of a sudden they had so many people, members of administration that they never talked to before, reaching out to them and saying like, hey, like, can we talk to you? Can we work on this? Which she felt was strange because she was like, you guys have never reached out to me before, so why now all of a sudden? But I know a lot of the students have been working with the administration, especially they mentioned Dean Ashby, just trying to implement more courses and get more faculty. And I know 2 new Native American faculty were hired. The Native American Student Alliances work with Dean Ashby. And so there has been some progress so far and hopefully a lot more progress to come.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
In other news, COVID cases at Duke have plummeted. Just 28 students tested positive this week. That's down from 126 students last week and over 300 students 2 weeks ago. Duke football picked up their first win at home on Friday. They beat North Carolina A&T, and women's soccer continued their so far undefeated season with a win over East Carolina. Also, the class of 2025 elected their Duke student government representatives. Check out our website to see the Chronicle's rundown of tutoring services on campus. There's also an explainer on why Panera replaced ABP in the Broadhead Center. Hint, there was a corporate buyout. That's all for this episode of DukeWeek. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe, share it with your friends, and help us get out the word that the Chronicle's got a weekly news podcast. That song you heard is called Goji Berry Beat by Nana Kwabena. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again next week.